I sincerely appreciate everyone who listened to my story without dismissing me as completely irrational. After this week, I wouldn't blame you if you're still unsure whether I'm losing my mind. Nevertheless, I must apologize. I've teased you about ghosts before, but today, I want to talk about someone very much alive. At least, I believe he is. Coming from Britain, I never had a ton of familiarity with America, particularly Louisiana. The main picture I had was from that Disney film with the singing frog. Be that as it may, my farm. Indeed, it's an alternate story. The geography befuddles me. Generally, it's fine. It sits next to a monstrous waterway. Toward the west of the house is an immense territory of mangrove trees, perpetual mud, and stale water. However, toward the east, past the soil track, there's an enormous dairy cattle field, about a section of land. There's a minuscule tin shack where the cows stay, and the actual land is loaded with profound openings, loaded up with cloudy water. It's difficult to get a handle on it. The remainder of the land around here is wild bog. Then at that point, there's this level, developed field, as though somebody straightened it over the stream, attempting to make it fit. But the real story I need to tell you is about my ranch hand. I don't know who he is, I don't know where he came from, and I don't know if he's alive or if he's something else. I see him now, in fact. From my bedroom on the second floor, I watch him move through the stables, his movements stiff, like one of those old animatronic figures you see at amusement parks. It's not natural. He's tossing hay into the rundown, decaying stables without breaking a sweat, like the weight of it doesn't bother him at all. The worst part, there are no horses in those stables. The hay just piles up, left to rot on the damp floor, the smell of decaying straw thick in the air. Every time I step outside, it hits me like the stench of rotting corpses. I want to scream at him to stop, but I can't. I'm afraid of him. And here's another thing, I don't know his first name. He just goes by Anderson, the same last name my dad had. But no, he can't be related. If he were, he would have inherited the ranch, wouldn't he? Unless he's a distant cousin, some half-uncle. But there's something off about him, something I can't put my finger on. He's so rude. I don't think he's very bright. Mostly he just grunts when I try to talk to him. But there's something else in his eyes, a spark of cruelty, something I can't ignore. Maybe I'm just being paranoid after everything that's happened, but I can see it, clear as day. I want to tell you about 2 encounters I had with him. The first one happened on my very first night here, at the ranch. I was still shaken from my ghost encounter earlier that day, trying to settle into the manor. I'd just gotten ready for bed and was creeping toward the lamb, bracing myself to face the darkness when I saw him. He was walking down the dusty track, massive, looming, nearly 7 feet tall. His clothes were dirty, stained with something dark. He wore a greasy baseball cap and had a patchy, untamed mullet. He looked wrong, like something out of place. He grabbed a pitchfork and began shoveling cattle muck into a big bucket. I stood frozen watching him from the window. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Every time he lifted his head, I half expected him to see me, to come for me. But he didn't. He didn't look malformed like the ghost from earlier, he just looked dirty, like someone who'd been living in filth for years. After what felt like an eternity, he finished and stomped off down the track. Before he disappeared from view, he turned and shot me a glare intensely blazing, like he was marking me, deciding if I was a threat. Then he was gone. 2 days ago, I got up early to feed the cattle. They're beautiful creatures, very calming. The cow shed was barely holding together, rust streaking down its walls, the air thick with the scent of mold and manure. Flies buzzed lazily, landing on me no matter how many times I swatted them away. There was a chill to the wind, sharp and biting, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. The cattle could feel it too, they were on edge, skittish, like something was wrong. I had just finished putting their food out when I saw him. "Morning, mate," I chimed, trying to act kindly despite how much I fear him. "It's bloody warm today, isn't it?" "S'pose, he responded, with a sound that was less like speech and more like a snort. He didn't even look at me when he spoke, and when I looked at him, well, I try not to be rude, but his face, it looked like something out of a nightmare. A huge, bloated mass of a man, his eyes too wide, his features twisted and unkempt like a hog with human skin. I wanted to ask you something. How much am I meant to be paying you? I didn't even know you worked here. And, well, I don't have much money right now, I asked, my voice trembling more than I meant it to. Nothing. I work for free, Anderson grunted, his voice flat, void of emotion. The way he said it was wrong, like he'd said it 1,000 times before, like it wasn't even a choice. His eyes met mine, and I couldn't look away. His pupils were wide, too wide, and it felt like he could see straight through me, reading every fear I had, like he was savoring it. Surely I should pay you something? You've been saving me a lot of work? I started, my throat dry, but I barely finished the sentence before he took a step closer. His sweat clung to him, thick, stinking. He wore nothing but ragged dungarees, and his scent hit me all at once. Rank, sour, like death itself. Anything for family, he muttered, his voice colder than before, dragging the words out with deliberate slowness. The pause that followed stretched on forever. My stomach twisted, a knot of dread tightening as I fought the urge to run. But before I could speak, before I could react, he turned and ran off. No, not just ran, he sprinted, faster than any man should be able to. It was unnatural, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as he disappeared into the distance, like a shadow vanishing before dawn. That moment keeps replaying in my mind. What terrifies me most about him is that he's not a ghost, not something intangible that fades away in the light of day. No, he's real, a living, breathing man, or whatever he is. I keep wondering, maybe he's just socially awkward. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I don't think so. There's something dark about him, something lurking beneath the surface. The way he said family. It was too cold, too distant. And when I look at him, I feel like a stranger on my own land, as if I'm the ghost here, as if I don't belong. But this is my ranch. I guess every family has that one distant relative, the drunk uncle, the cousin who makes Christmas dinners uncomfortable, and maybe Anderson's mine. But, not to sound cruel, but why did he survive that massacre, and not my father? I guess what I'm really trying to say is, I'm struggling to run this ranch, even without the ghosts. What I needed was help, support, not this thing. I'm uncertain about Anderson's identity, origins, and even his nature, whether he is alive or something else entirely. However, I sense he is concealing something from me, something he knows about this place. I can't shake the feeling that there are more dangers here than just ghosts. Should I confront him, or would that be a grave mistake? In Michigan, there's a little place called Traverse City. It's a smallish, very esoteric, hippie kind of town. In this town, there's a bona fide abandoned mental institution, complete with an absolutely enormous deserted grounds and dilapidated buildings, an old rusty water tower, and a huge stone basin in the middle of the woods that could hold maybe about 50 people. You know, the works. This actually isn't the creepy part, believe it or not, as nothing scary really happened there. It was actually quite the popular hangout for college kids to get stoned and whatnot. It's more of a small detail on just how strange this town is, and kind of a backstory. You see, when the mental ward shut down, the patients were basically let loose to their own devices, and many of them ended up as one of the many homeless people that just roamed the town. And some of them just ended up in the Whiting. The Whiting was the cheapest apartment in town, basically a month-to-month hotel. It really wasn't a bad place. There was a housekeeper that stopped by once a week to clean the place up. It wasn't falling apart or infested with pests or anything. It was technically a sort of halfway home years and years ago, and it had to be shut down when some man was found dead of heroin overdose on the front steps. It eventually reopened to the public again, and some of the people who lived there previously had nowhere else to go and moved back in. At this point of the story, I was a really broke college kid. I got some really weird vibes from the place, but I was really short on money, and I thought it would be an interesting experience to say the least. Well, I wasn't wrong. First of all, it looked like the architect had actually gleaned inspiration from The Shining. Long, narrow hallways, some straight and some swooping around. Some that started out normal and then got so narrow that you literally had to walk sideways to fit. There was painted over doors and doors that led to nowhere, and tiny doll-sized doors in the hallway that never opened. There were a lot of creepy pictures of crying girls or off-putting abstract paintings decorating the walls. My friend lived in a small room that had a large, mysterious X painted over his bed. He also had a painted-over log door to his left. And my other friend, who lived on the second story at the end of the building, had a window that looked out of a straight-up brick wall. Pretty bizarre, right? Well, wait until you meet your neighbors. Schizophrenics and drugged-out zombies wandered up and down the halls that were peeked out of their doors before slamming it shut. You could just be walking along when the door would suddenly open, and a battered-looking woman would tell you that the other tenants were trying to hurt her and that she was going to be sleeping with a knife for protection. Another good friend of mine once opened her door and found an entire lamp taken apart piece by piece and then aligned on her doorstep. There's a few incidents that really stick out in my mind. Once I went to the shattered kitchen to make myself lasagna. One of the women was already there, and she was sitting in a kitchen chair just talking to herself in a high-pitched girly voice. Now, this woman was a big and rather imposing individual, made all the more intimidating because she had a habit of ramming people in the shoulder whenever she passed them in the halls. She's just sitting there and mocking and insulting me the entire time, but all to herself, as if I can't hear her. All while eyeing me with a sideways, dead-eyed kind of look. Every now and then, she gives a high-pitched giggle that sounded truly sinister. Well, I then say, everything all right? And she's muttering to herself, the thing's talking to me, I won't respond. And then she giggles. I'm definitely perplexed at this point. I get a fork, and I'm preparing to exit, and she then begins truly going crazy and starts quickly saying, you got a fork? You gonna get that? You gonna me in the throat and murder my family with that fork? Indeed, she was really shouting toward its end. I didn't stay close by. I might in any case hear her shouting at whatever point I would remove my poo from the entryway, happening about harming her. Also, very much like some film, I can hear sharp, crazy chuckling reverberating down the corridors as she gets stronger and stronger. Genuinely brought goosebumps up to my arms, I can let you know that. Some other time, a man was so screwed up on certain substances that he could barely stand, and he attempted to pursue me. He was at the foot of the steps and I needed to pass him, and he attempted to slur some gibberish at me while I strolled by him. I think he expressed something about a shower. Indeed, he connects and snatches my arm, and afterward has a go at pulling me toward him. I pull away so quick that he gets pushed over, and as I'm running up the steps, he's attempting to gather himself and stand back up. I conceal in my companion's room, and we can hear him slumping and beating up the steps, simply calling for me in a doped-up kind of manner. About 7 days after the fact, he obviously overlooks it, and I see him in the hall. He had asked me which room I lived in. No doubt that is a short synopsis of the truly unpleasant spot that I lived in at a certain point. It was certainly an intriguing and frightening experience, no doubt.